Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one.
The introduction. On a chilly evening in late March, the small town of Avendale lay engulfed in darkness, lit only by the amber glow of distant street. Nestled amidst a sea of evergreen trees, the population of just 3,000 had settled into their evening routines. Unaware within this tranquil facade lay a depth of hidden despair. Inside the modest brick home at 157 Maple Street, Julia Carter stared blankly at the flickering light of her television. A slight figure with short-cropped hair and glasses perched on her nose. She fidgeted with the charm bracelet that adorned her wrist, each trinket a reminder of happier times. It had been 2 weeks since she had last heard from her brother, Mark, a local handyman known for his infectious laughter and friendly demeanor. Typically, he would stop by for dinner or share a spontaneous plan that never failed to include. As the clock struck 8, Julia's gut churned with anxiety, the phone resting motionless on the table in front of her. She had tried to reach him countless times, each unanswered call gnawing at her sanity. Minutes turned into hours, and with each tick of the clock, dread settled deeper within her heart. She shoved her fading hope aside and resolved to do what any concerned sister would do. She would search for him. It wasn't like Mark to leave without a word, and this bizarre silence fueled her fear. Unable to shake the uneasy feeling hanging over her, Julia pulled on her coat, resolved to find him, but unaware of the chilling reality that awaited her outside. In the shadows cast by the streetlights, another story was about to unfold, a tale marked by twists and dark truths, unwinding just beneath the surface of this tight-knit community. The victim. As Julia stepped outside, the cool air struck her like a wave, sending a shiver down her spine. She braced herself against the chill, her mind racing through potential scenarios. Mark had been his usual self during their last encounter. They had shared a laugh over her questionable cooking, and he had promised to stop by for Easter dinner the following week. She made her way down the tree-lined street, her footsteps echoing softly in the engulfing silence. As the streetlights flickered above, the memories of her brother began to flood her thoughts. Mark was a fixture of Avendale. Neighbors would often see him fixing roofs, mending fences, and lending a helping hand without a second thought. Yet those contributions masked his own demons. Despite his jovial personality, Mark wore a heavy burden that few could ever see, the fading memory of a loved one lost too soon. Their mother had passed away years ago, leaving a considerable void in their lives. One that sometimes twisted Mark's laughter into something melancholic. Julia often worried about the way he internalized pain, wondering if he had ever truly healed. Reaching the neighborhood park, she paused to catch her breath. The soft hum of crickets and rustling leaves provided an eerie backdrop to her unease. She peered into the darkness, almost expecting to see him in a familiar spot, leaning against the old oak tree, joking about the luck of the squirrels. But as the shadows deepened, Julia couldn't shake the sense of wrongness. It was a feeling deeper than just concern. It was a dread that gripped her. The sense that every moment she spent searching for him was drawing her closer to a truth she couldn't yet comprehend. A revelation hidden just past the veil of the ordinary. The crime scene, the park, usually alive with the laughter of children and the songs of night birds, felt ghostly in its stillness as Julia ventured further. A sense of foreboding wrapped itself around her like a heavy cloak. But determined to find her brother, She pressed all. Her footsteps crunched against the small stones along the path. As she approached the clearing, the moonlight illuminating the ground ahead. As she stepped into the open, her heart sank. There, lying just past the old oak tree, was a familiar figure, a dark shape sprawled across the grass. Julia's breath caught in her throat, and panic set in as she dashed forward, praying it was just a trick of the light. It was just a trick of the light, but as she drew closer, her worst fears materialized. It was Mark. His lifeless body sprawled awkwardly beneath the moonlit sky. The laughter that once animated his features was gone, replaced by an unsettling stillness. Dark stains marred his clothing, soaking into the grass beneath him, and the world around her faded into a dull silence, punctuated only by the frantic thumping of her heart. Julia knelt next to him, desperate for a sign, a flicker of life in those once vibrant eyes. Tremors racked her body, and she struggled to comprehend the horror unfolding before her. The serene setting now bore witness to an unimaginable tragedy. Suddenly, the distant sound of sirens sliced through the night, drawing closer with each passing second. Julia stood, her hands trembling as she backed away from the scene, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. Why was her brother here? What had happened? The arrival of the first responders would soon turn her anguished world upside down. Their presence would fill the clearing with officialdom. But within Julia's heart lay a sprawling uncertainty, a chaotic rush of emotions simmering beneath the surface fear. Anger, confusion. She knew instinctively that this was only the beginning of a dark and complex unraveling. The early investigation. As the squad cars pulled into the park, flashing lights painted the night in garish blues and reds, turning the serene scene into a chaotic tableau. Officers emerged from their vehicles, all stern expressions and hurried movements. Julia stood rooted in place, frozen in horror and disbelief, as the authorities swiftly descended on the area. Detective Laura Evans, a veteran investigator with a reputation for tenacity, was among the first to arrive. With her auburn hair neatly tied back, and a slate-gray coat that added seriousness to her demeanor, she surveyed the scene, her experienced eyes locked onto the body of Mark Carter, a grim frown forming as she mentally cataloged the elements of the unfolding case. "Secure the perimeter," she called out, her voice commanding for the officers to establish boundaries with crimson tape. They moved quickly, transforming the park into a scene marked with shredder-like tension. Julia's heart raced as she caught the detective's gaze. It was both reassuring and chilling to see someone in charge, someone who would seek the truth. Detective Evans knelt beside Mark's body, carefully examining the scene, taking note of the dark stains on his clothing, the position of his arms, and the distant echo of crickets that refused to break the thick silence surrounding them. As she initiated the initial investigation, other officers questioned Julia. "Ma'am, did you see anything unusual this evening?" one asked, his tone professional yet sympathetic, unable to articulate her thoughts through the haze of trauma. Julia simply shook her head, her mouth dry. Within those first hours, the pieces of evidence would begin to fall into place. Fingerprints, a shoe print nestled in the mud, and the lingering scent of something unnatural in the air, something that would eventually shape the narrative of Mark's final moments. The night wore on, shadows lengthening in the pale glow of the streetlights, but the clarity of daylight would soon present a stark contrast to the truth that lay ticking beneath the surface of Avendale. The investigation had begun, and with it, a cold, new reality took hold. The dead ends. As dawn broke over Avendale, Detective Evans clicked off her recorder and leaned back against her vehicle, allowing exhaustion to seep into her bow. The night had unfolded in a series of fragmented testimonies, each witness providing a piece of a jigsaw puzzle that refused to align. The park remained a crime scene, sealed off as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that danced across the ground where Mark had fallen. Julia sat on a nearby bench, wrapped in a heavy blanket provided by an officer, her eyes distant as she wrestled with the horror of the night. Family members and friends had begun to arrive, their faces painted with confusion and despair. Among them was Mary, Julia's childhood friend, who sat beside her, offering a consolation that felt meaningless in this moment. "Do you know anything?" Her voice nearly lost to the rustling leaves around them. "I don't understand how this could happen," Julia replied, her voice cracking. "Mark was good. He wouldn't provoke anyone." The police were disbanding one by one, their faces grim as they delivered fleeting updates to Detective Evans. She had pursued every lead, but the walls kept closing in. Mark's closest friends had been accounted for, all claiming to have been at work or home during the time of his death. Each fingerprint collected yielded no matches. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses revealed nothing suspicious in the hours surrounding his disappearance. Every dead end felt like a weight pressing down on Evans as she returned to the park to review the scene once more. The crow landed nearby, its call echoing ominously amidst the quiet, as if challenging the detective to uncover the truth. Swallowing her frustration, she scanned the area for anything she might have missed. A glimmer caught her eye. Something shiny nestled in the grass caught the morning light, a small pendant, similar to one Mark used to wear, an unsettling reminder of his lost identity. In that moment, Evans sensed the clock ticking down. Someone had taken Mark's life, and it was only a matter of time before deeper secrets would surface. The investigation was just beginning, but they now faced the possibility of a long and arduous journey through the shadows of the past, where Jane Doe lives would intertwine with the threads of Mark's final hours. A break in the case. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie orange glow over Avendale, Detective Evans found himself poring over the case file at her desk in the precinct. Though exhausting, it was the only way to keep the momentum alive. The walls around her were plastered with notes and timelines, but the stillness of the evening began to wear her. She rubbed her temples, searching for clarity as she sifted through each piece of evidence, each dead end gnawing at her frustration. Just as she was about to take a break, her phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with a familiar number. Officer Jensen, one of the younger officers who had been assisting on the case. With an eager voice, he began speaking before Evans could even greet him. "Detective, you're going to want to see this," he said breathlessly. We pulled a camera feed from a nearby convenience store. It's been a long shot, but Evans felt a surge of adrenaline rush through her veins. "What did you find?" "There's a car parked outside the park just before Mark went missing. It doesn't belong to him, and it's pretty distinctive," Jensen continued, pulling up the footage that showed a dark sedan idling outside the tree lot. A few minutes later, Evans stood in the station's back office, the video playing on a small monitor. A figure emerged from the car door and wearing a hoodie, features obscure. They faced the park, glancing around before strolling away from the vehicle. towards the oak tree, where Mark's body had been found. Evans felt a prickle of recognition. There was something painfully familiar about the date. As the figure disappeared from the frame, Jensen manipulated the footage to enhance the clarity. He paused it at a moment with the figure turned, just enough to reveal what appeared to be a tattoo on the wrist. Evans squinted, an inkling of recall surfacing in her mind. "Do we have a license plate?" she asked, her heart quickening. "Working on it now. But we might have a name," Jensen replied, a hint of urgency threading through his voice. Hours later, as Evans awaited confirmation, the pieces began to align strangely. With the name in hand, the investigation had shifted from ambiguity to a targeted pursuit. For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope navigated through the shadows. The hunt was on for answers, and Detective Evans wasn't willing to let this break slip through her finger. The suspect. The sun had barely risen when Detective Evans arrived at the small, graffiti-laden building that housed the studio of Jake Miller, the artist connected to the footage. Known for his edgy style and rebellious spirit, Jake had made a name for himself in the local art scene. Yet his reputation was marred by whispers of petty crime and clashes with the law. Evans climbed the few worn steps leading to his front door, determination pulsing through her veins. She knocked firmly, the sound echoing in the quiet morning. After a few moments, Jake answered, a young man in his mid-20s, unkempt hair spilling out from under a paint-splattered cap. The moment their eyes met, she saw a flicker of recognition cross his face, his expression shifting from surprise to defensiveness. "Detective Evans," he introduced himself, maintaining an even tone. "I'd like to ask you a few questions regarding your whereabouts on the night of Mark Carter's death." A flicker of anxiety darted across Jake's face, but he masked it quickly. "I didn't do anything. I was just painting that night your car was spotted near the park," Evans interjected, her voice cutting through the tension. "You were seen heading towards the area where Mark was found. We need to know why." Jake swallowed hard. It was a small gesture, but significant. Looking for inspiration, he stammered, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. "I had no idea anyone was there." Looking for inspiration in the dark, Evans pressed, her piercing gaze locked onto his. "Or perhaps someone you knew." He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "Look, I didn't know what you were suggesting. Mark and I had a history, sure, but I wouldn't hurt him." "What kind of history?" "Sure, but I wouldn't hurt him." "What kind of history?" Evans leaned in closer, sensing hesitation, a crack in his facade. Jake sighed deeply and ran a hand through his hair, the tension thickening in the air. "We had a falling out a few months back. I didn't want to work with him anymore. He didn't understand my art. But I wouldn't kill him." Despite his denials, his demeanor portrayed more than he intended. The atmosphere thickened with his nervous energy, and Evans noted every detail of the way he fidgeted. The quiver in his voice, the faint hint of sweat beginning to line his brow. "Your tattoo was visible in the surveillance footage, Jake," she continued. "The evidence is mounting against you. If you know anything, now is the time to come clean." An incredulous look crossed his face. "I swear I'm innocent," he insisted, desperation creeping in. Evans remained passive but resolute. "I hope you'll remember that as we dig deeper into this case. Each lie will only complicate your situation further." As she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of vulnerability in his eyes. The conversation had planted seeds of doubt, and Jake might soon find himself facing the consequences of past choices. What seemed like a simple inquiry was unraveling threads that could entangle him in far darker matters. The coil of the investigation tightened, and the pieces of Mark's story began to intertwine with those of the living in ways no one could have predicted. The trial. Months had passed since Detective Evans first stepped foot in that park, each day tightening the knots of grief that bound Julia to her brother's memory. With the dawning of autumn, the air was crisp and charged with anticipation, as the courtroom buzzed with the faint murmurs of the gathered crowd. Today was the day that justice was set to unfold, a day that would expose dark secrets woven through Avendale's fabric. Jake Miller, at the center of attention, sat nervously at the defendant's table, his hands clasped as if in prayer. He wore a pressed shirt, a stark contrast to the paint-splattered attire that had defined him for so long, a visual representation of the transformation forced upon. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the air electric as family and friends from both sides filled the benches. As the bailiff called the court to order, Julia took her seat, her heart pounding in her chest. Evans sat in the back, her gaze never leaving Jake. She still recalled the uncertainty that flickered behind his bravado, the suspicion that whispered of deeper truths. The prosecution opened its case with a precise chronology of evidence. Surveillance footage, eyewitness accounts, and most damning DNA matched, found on the pendant that had been recovered at the crime scene. The details slashed through the air like a cold wind, and Julia's breath hitched as images of Mark flooded her memory, his laughter, his spirit replacing the painful void left behind. The defense, led by a seasoned attorney, scrambled to dismantle the prosecution's arguments, painting Jake as a misunderstood artist caught in a whirlwind of accusations. They leaned heavily on Mark's complicated history with his family, suggesting that strained relationships might have led to motives beyond Jake's breast. As the trial continued, emotions racked the courtroom, but Evans remained steadfast, taking notes and absorbing every piece of testimony that could strengthen the case against Jake. Each detail fed her determination she could not allow Mark's spirit to fade. Finally, under heavy scrutiny, Jake took the stand. His voice wavered as he recounted that fateful night. Denying any intention to harm Mark, he explained their falling out, a rift that had left wounds on both sides, but claimed he had stayed clear of the park that evening. Yet, with each question from the prosecutor, cracks appeared in his story. Prosecutors' piercing inquiries left Jake flustered. The inconsistencies were palpable, and doubt settled over the courtroom like a dense fog. In fervent moments of silence following the testimonies, Julia's resolve solidified. She grasped the folds of her jacket, the weight of the trial pressing down against her heart. The jury would soon retire to deliberate, and she could only hope they would recognize the truth hidden within the tangled narrative. Regardless of the trial's outcome, the story of Mark Carter became one of record, a reflection of the lives intertwined by fate, and the consequences that often lay just beyond the surface, waiting to be unearthed. The aftermath. The courtroom's silence was deafening as the jury returned, their faces inscrutable. A chill swept through the gallery where Julia sat, clutching the armrests of her chair with white-knuckled intensity. In the preceding hours, she had wrestled with her grief, and now she felt an ache in her chest that could almost drown out the pounding of her heart. When the foreman announced the verdict, Julia's breath caught in her throat. We find the defendant, Jake Miller, guilty of second-degree murder. The words hung in the air like a heavy shroud, eliciting gasps from the audience, and a bitter mixture of relief and anguish filled Julia's heart. Justice. But at what cost? She felt the tears welling up in her eyes as the reality of Mark's absence crashed down her once more. The world around her began to blur as she recalled the warmth of his laughter, the comforting presence that was now extinguished. Jake's reaction was stark, his face drained of color, a look of disbelief etched deeply into his features. He glanced briefly at Julia, and in that fleeting moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that this chapter would alter the course of many lives forever. As the courtroom emptied, Evans approached Julia, her demeanor respectful yet weary. "You did well through this," she said softly, her eyes holding an understanding that transcended words. "I know it doesn't change what happened." Julia nodded slowly, feeling the heaviness settle deeper. "Thank you for finding him, for bringing him to justice." "Justice is never enough," Evans murmured, her own heart mirroring the weight of despair that lingered around them. "But it's a start. Now you can begin to heal." With time, Julia knew the process of healing would not be linear. It would snake through winding paths of grief, denial, guilt, and acceptance. She gazed out of the window as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and deepening violet and unyielding rumor. Ways ein ye death. Always did. People laughed, walked their dogs, and enjoyed lives unmarred by tragedy. But in Julia's heart, a raw wound remained. Jack could never be filled. She left the courtroom that day carrying the weight of memory, one that would shape her decisions and how she viewed the world, more resilient, but marked forever by what had transpired. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as Avendale began to recover from the shock of the trial. Grief turned into activism for Julia, who spent time educating others about mental health in the wake of violence. Their community was teetering on a fragile balance, held together by the shared understanding that even in darkness, hope could bloom. In time, Mark's name would resonate within those walls through stories told, art inspired, and conversations sparked. The legacy of his life would shimmer in their memories, transforming tragedy into a rallying cry for change, ensuring that his story, though marked by sorrow, would never truly fade away. Reflection. As the seasons shifted from summer to fall, Julia found herself experiencing life through a newfound lens zone that came alive with both beauty and sorrow. The air was crisp, the leaves danced in a glow, and yet there remained an undeniable heaviness within her. The echoes of Mark's laughter and warmth lingered in the corners of her mind, forever intertwined with an unfathomable void. In the quiet hours, she often visited the park where everything had changed. She would sit on the same bench, the one where she had waited in agitation all those months ago, a place imbued with both grief and healing. This sanctuary had transformed into a space for reflection, where she could process her emotions unfettered by judgment. She often recalled the conversations they used to have about dreams, aspirations, and the endless possibilities that stretched before them, with every breath filled with the scent of the forest. Julia allowed herself to linger on those memories and the lessons her brother's life had imparted. Though there was anger at the interruption of their future together, there was also gratitude for the moments shared.